The Tuskegee Syphilis Study stands as a chilling reminder of the potential for medical research to exploit and harm vulnerable populations. It is a stark example of how scientific endeavors can go horribly wrong when ethical considerations are cast aside. This study, conducted over 4 decades in Macon County, Alabama, remains a dark stain on the history of American medicine and race relations. The setting itself, a region steeped in the legacy of slavery and segregation, underscores the deep-seated racial prejudices that fueled this unethical experiment. It is a story of broken promises, blatant racism, and a shocking disregard for human life. The men who participated were not just subjects, they were victims of a gross violation of their human rights. The study, which began in 1932, involved nearly 400 African American men, all of whom were infected with syphilis. These men were not informed of their diagnosis, nor were they given the option to consent to the study with full knowledge of its implications. These men, many of whom were poor and illiterate sharecroppers, were enticed into the study with promises of free medical care. They were misled into believing they were receiving treatment for bad blood, a term used to describe various ailments. They were never told they had syphilis, nor were they given any effective treatment for the deadly disease. Instead, they were subjected to painful and invasive procedures under the guise of medical care. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study was not a rogue experiment conducted in the shadows. It was a meticulously planned and executed study, sanctioned by the United States Public Health Service. It was designed and implemented by the United States Public Health Service, a respected government agency. This involvement lent an air of legitimacy to the study, masking its true nature from the public and the participants. For 40 years, the USPHS studied the progression of untreated syphilis in these men, even after penicillin became the standard treatment for the disease in the 1940s. The decision to withhold treatment was a deliberate and calculated act of negligence. The researchers deliberately withheld this life-saving medication from the participants, choosing instead to observe the devastating effects of the disease as it ravaged their bodies. The men suffered from severe health complications, including blindness, mental illness, and death. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study is a stark reminder of the dangers of scientific arrogance and the devastating consequences of unchecked prejudice. It highlights the critical need for ethical oversight in medical research. It is a story that demands to be told and remembered so that history does not repeat itself. The legacy of Tuskegee has prompted significant changes in how medical research is conducted, ensuring greater protection for participants. The lessons learned from Tuskegee continue to shape medical ethics and research practices today, serving as a powerful reminder of the importance of informed consent, patient autonomy, and the ethical imperative to treat all human beings with dignity and respect. The story of Tuskegee is a call to action for ongoing vigilance and commitment to ethical standards in all areas of research. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study unfolded over an appalling span of 40 years, from 1932 to 1972. This period saw significant changes in medical science and ethics, yet the study persisted in its unethical practices. In 1932, researchers from the USPHS, in collaboration with the Tuskegee Institute, a historically black college, initiated the study under the guise of providing free health care to African American men in Macon County, Alabama. These men were promised treatment for bad blood, a term used to describe various ailments, including syphilis. This area had a high prevalence of syphilis, a sexually transmitted infection that can lead to severe health problems, including blindness, heart disease, mental illness, and even death if left untreated. The men, mostly sharecroppers, were lured by the promise of free medical care, meals, and burial insurance. The study's initial phase focused on observing the natural progression of untreated syphilis in black men. The participants were not informed of their diagnosis and were misled to believe they were receiving treatment. The researchers believed that syphilis manifested differently in black people than in white people, a racist assumption that fueled the study's unethical design. This belief was rooted in the pseudo-scientific notions of racial differences in disease susceptibility and progression. In the 1940s, a turning point occurred when penicillin emerged as an effective treatment for syphilis. This discovery revolutionized the treatment of bacterial infections and offered a cure for syphilis. This discovery presented the researchers with a profound ethical dilemma. They had the means to cure the participants, but chose to withhold treatment to continue their observations. Would they provide the men in their study with this life-saving medication, effectively ending their experiment, or would they continue to observe the disease's devastating effects? The decision they made would have lasting consequences. Tragically, they chose the latter. The men continued to suffer and die from a disease that was now curable. The researchers not only withheld penicillin from the participants, but also went to great lengths to prevent them from receiving treatment from other sources. They ensured that local doctors and clinics were unaware of the participants' true condition. They actively interfered with the men's access to healthcare, denying them penicillin, even when it became widely available through public health programs. This deliberate obstruction was a gross violation of medical ethics. Despite growing criticism of the study's ethical implications within the medical community, it continued unabated. Some medical professionals raised concerns, but their voices were largely ignored. The researchers, blinded by their own ambition and prejudice, justified their actions by arguing that the men were better off receiving no treatment than the inadequate treatment available before penicillin. They claimed that the study's findings would benefit future generations. They claimed that the study provided valuable insights into the progression of syphilis, even though the participants were subjected to unnecessary suffering and death. The men were treated as mere subjects rather than human beings with rights and dignity. In 1972, after 4 decades of deception and abuse, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study was finally exposed to the public by Peter Buxtun, a former USPHS venereal disease investigator. Buxtun had been disturbed by the study's ethical violations and sought to bring them to light. Buxtun, horrified by what he had learned about the study, had tried to raise concerns internally, but was ignored. His persistence and moral courage eventually led him to leak the information to the media. In desperation, he leaked information to the media, sparking a national outcry and bringing the study to an abrupt halt. The public was shocked and appalled by the revelations. The public was outraged by the revelations of the study's callous disregard for human life. Protests erupted, and the government was forced to take action. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study became a symbol of medical racism and unethical research practices, leaving an indelible stain on the history of medicine and race relations in the United States. It led to significant changes in research ethics and the establishment of stricter guidelines to protect human subjects in medical research. The nearly 400 African American men who participated in the Tuskegee Syphilis Study were not willing subjects in a scientific endeavor. They were, in fact, unwitting participants in a deeply unethical experiment that spanned decades. They were victims of a system designed to exploit their vulnerability and silence their voices. This system was built on a foundation of racial prejudice and systemic inequality, which permeated every aspect of their lives. Most of these men were impoverished sharecroppers living in Macon County, Alabama, an area with limited access to healthcare and education. Their daily lives were marked by hard labor and economic hardship, making them particularly susceptible to exploitation. They were enticed into the study with the promise of free medical care, meals, and burial insurance benefits they could scarcely afford and desperately needed. These promises were a lifeline in a world where such basic necessities were often out of reach. These incentives, coupled with the perceived prestige of being treated by government doctors, clouded their judgment and made them susceptible to exploitation. The trust they placed in these medical professionals was tragically misplaced. The men were never fully informed about the true nature of the study. They were kept in the dark about the real intentions of the researchers, who saw them not as patients but as mere subjects for observation. They were told they were being treated for bad blood, a vague term that encompassed a variety of ailments. This term was deliberately chosen to obscure the true nature of their condition and the study itself. Syphilis, the actual disease under investigation, was never mentioned. The men were left unaware of the serious and potentially deadly nature of their illness. The researchers deliberately obscured the study's purpose, using deceit and manipulation to maintain the participants' cooperation. This deception was a cornerstone of the study, ensuring that the men would remain compliant and unaware. The men underwent painful and unnecessary procedures such as spinal taps, which were presented as special treatments for their condition. These procedures were not only invasive but also carried significant risks. They were denied access to effective treatments, even after penicillin became widely available, ensuring that they would continue to suffer the debilitating effects of syphilis. This denial of treatment was a deliberate act of cruelty. The researchers' disregard for the participants' well-being extended beyond withholding treatment. They showed a complete lack of empathy and concern for the suffering of these men. They actively interfered with the men's access to healthcare outside the study. This interference ensured that the men remained within the control of the researchers and continued to suffer. The USPHS contacted local physicians and instructed them not to treat the men for syphilis. This collusion between government agencies and local doctors further isolated the men from potential sources of help. Even when the men were drafted into the military during World War II, the researchers intervened to ensure they would not receive penicillin from military doctors. This intervention was a stark reminder of the lengths to which the researchers would go to maintain their study. The researchers' actions demonstrated a callous disregard for the participants' lives and a willingness to prioritize their experiment over the health and well-being of human beings. Their primary concern was the continuation of their study, regardless of the human cost. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study is a chilling reminder of the power dynamics that can shape medical research and the vulnerability of marginalized communities to exploitation. It highlights the dangers of unchecked authority and the need for ethical oversight in research. The men who participated in this study were denied their basic human rights and subjected to unimaginable suffering in the name of science. Their plight is a stark illustration of the consequences of dehumanizing individuals in the pursuit of knowledge. Their stories serve as a stark warning against the dangers of unchecked prejudice and the importance of protecting the rights and dignity of all human subjects in research. It is a call to action to ensure that such atrocities are never repeated.